Circling back to one of the top stories we're tracking for you today, vote counting is underway in the U.S. state of Georgia after polls closed in the final Senate race.
Incumbent Democratic Senator Raphael Warnock is hoping to get reelected, while rival Republican Herschel Walker is looking to unseat him. The outcome will determine whether the Democrats can further consolidate their thin majority in the upper house.
And it could impact Donald Trump's clout among Republicans as he's hoping to win their ticket in his bid to return to the White House. We are joined by Professor William Howell. He's a Sidney Stein professor in American politics at University of Chicago. Professor, thank you so much for joining us. So the polls have been closed in Georgia in a fierce Senate runoff election. What do you see as the key factors that will decide the last race of the midterms?
Sure. They're counting votes as we speak. They're rolling in right now. This is a story really about turnout. It's less a story about persuasion. Georgia has been inundated with money and advertising, and both these candidates are well known. And the outcome is going to crucially depend upon which side gets out more of their base. And I think right now the early signs point towards Warnock having a slight advantage because Democrats are squarely behind him. But there's some misgivings among Republicans about Herschel Walker, and that's what gives Warnock a slight edge. But it's going to be down to the wire. And as I say, we're counting votes as we speak. We'll see how this turns out.
Professor, the runoff in Georgia is being watched closely, even though the Dems have already secured control of the upper chamber. And that's because of two particular conservative-leaning Democrats. Can you explain why this race is so vital and what is at stake?
Right. Well, in 2020, there were two runoffs in Georgia. Both Senate races were open, and the Democrats had to go 2 for 2 in order to get the majority. They now have the majority. They have 50 seats, the Democrats do. But nonetheless, there are some big stakes involved in this race. I'll point to two. One is that while the Democrats have secured a majority, it isn't clear that they're going to hold on to that majority 2 years hence. When a third of the Senate is again up for the senators are up for re-election, and they face a tougher row to hoe there. And so every seat is going to count if they can hold on to their majority status in 2024. The other thing is that Herschel Walker was handpicked by Donald Trump, and the status of Donald Trump in the Republican Party remains highly contested. The direction of the Republican Party remains very much up for grabs. And I think a lot of people will be looking to the outcome of this race as an indicator of his status with the electorate and make inferences on the basis of that about the kind of influence he ought to be wielding within the party.
Yeah, as you mentioned, Mr. Trump. Now, if Mr. Warnock wins the runoff, how big a blow would this be for the former president? I mean, who's been backing Mr. Walker and has already had a miserable midterm elections with many of his most high-profile endorsees losing.
He has. This has not been a good electoral season for Trump. Herschel Walker was handpicked by Trump to run in a state that's decidedly Republican. The governor is Republican. Both the House and the Senate of the state legislature are held by the Republican Party. And John Ossoff, who's the other senator from Georgia, is a Democrat. And a lot of people have pointed fingers at Trump and his election denying in 2020 as part of the reason why the Democrats were able to secure those two seats. And if he can't see through and get his handpicked candidate elected in a state that, while trending blue, remains decidedly red, it's going to speak to, I think, a lot of people's concerns about the kind of clout that he has or his lack of clout within the larger electorate. And it's on the basis of that he's likely to lose some influence within the party.
Speaking of clout, Professor, can you talk about the moderate Democrats, Joe Manchin and Kyrsten Sinema? What happens as a result of this runoff in their case and their role?
Well, they'll still be important. I mean, to say that Warnock wins this seat gives the Democratic Party a little bit of breathing room, but Sinema is likely to continue to play a key role. they've got to get both of those, Joe Manchin and Sinema. They've got to get at least one of the two. Those are the two most conservative Democrats in the Democratic Party in the Senate. And they're going to have to get at least one of the two. And for the most part, they tend to walk in lockstep with one another. They're awfully close ideologically to one another. So a little bit of breathing room for the Democrats, but not much. I'll say, this is likely, to the extent that this is going to have a bearing on outcomes, it's likely to matter more for judicial appointments than it is for legislation, because the Democrats have lost control of the House. And having lost control of the House, it's not clear that they have a pathway towards advancing much in terms of a legislative agenda. But they certainly would rather be 51-49 than 50-50 as they try to make appointments in the executive branch and in the federal judiciary in the next couple of years.
Yeah, I mean, Democrats performed at the top end of expectation to keep the Senate this year, but how much more difficult a climb do they face in 2024?
It's going to be a heavier lift. And that's just a function of who's up for re-election. Their senators serve staggered terms, so 33 or 34 of the senators will be up for re-election, and more in 2024, and more of them are going to be Democrats in tough races. I'll say, though, let's not lose sight of the significance of these midterm elections. The the party of the president reliably loses seats in midterm elections. And so all expectations were pointing towards the Democrats losing control, certainly of the House and likely of the Senate, that they only lost a bare majority to the Republican Party in the House and were managed to hold on to the Senate is really quite significant and historically, at least, extraordinary.
All right. Thank you so much for your insights today, Professor. That was Professor William Howell, Sidney Stein Professor in American Politics at University of Chicago.